Hey guys,
All
welcome
right.
back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. Guys, if you have a business and you want to get your branding and marketing right for 2024, this is the episode you need to listen to. And this right here is the guy you need to listen to. He has an amazing podcast, the Headsmack podcast. Yes, I was on his show and I got it wrong 3 times. So guys, we're going to be talking about branding, marketing. This gentleman is the Swiss Army knife of branding and marketing. I can't wait to have him on. This is going to be fun. And guys, this is my 6th interview today. I got 2 more
Wow.
after this, and it's all because of Vertical Momentum Coffee. If you love coffee, high energy, let me know and I'll drop the links below. 100% of the proceeds go to help people struggling with PTSD and homelessness. I make no money off of it. I'm just trying to change the world one drop at a time. So, Paul, my brother, welcome to the
Hey,
show.
man.
How are you?
Doing good, doing good. Well, I've recorded 2 podcasts and had a brief coaching call today, so it's all about the being behind the microphone today. It seems like.
You had 2 of my heroes and mentors. You had DY, Dennis Yu on your show, and you had my man 365 driven Tony Watley on your show. Bro, you're putting some heavy hitters on your show. Just starting out, you've got some of the biggest hitters out there already, and you're brand new.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's been amazing how I've been able to reach out to folks, and it's kind of one of those things of just reaching out to people that are part of your circle, part of your world, that you pay attention to, and that are saying interesting things, and just being bold enough to ask. And I think sometimes we don't have stuff because we don't ask for it. I mean, the Bible talks about you have not because you ask not, and I think that's a good mantra for me is, just ask. And you'd be amazed by the list of people that I have in my Notion dashboard of people that I've reached out to and asked and haven't heard back from, that are kind of in my list of I want to have on. But I went ahead and asked, and they said yes. So it's been awesome.
Well, I got to give a shout out because without Dennis Yu, I met him 5 years ago. I wouldn't be doing the $1 a day. I've been doing it every month for 5 years. Without Tony Watley, I wouldn't be using the AI that I am using. So those 2 guys right there have changed my life and my business. So Dennis, Tony, I love you guys, and your episodes are fire, and I can't wait to listen to everything because I'm always learning. So first
Yeah.
question I got, Paul, bro, is what is your definition of resiliency?
Resiliency is getting up no matter what happens because you have a higher purpose that drives you. I mean, I've never really thought about it, but that for me, that's what comes to mind is, you get knocked down, you stumble, you fall, you mess up, you screw up, and you keep going because there's something bigger driving you and you have hope. And I think once you lose hope and once you lose some purpose, something driving you, I think that's where resilience stops. That's where you give up. That's where you back down. That's where you fold up and don't keep going. And so, I would think that hope and purpose are probably the key things for resiliency.
Okay, so you don't exactly have the New Jersey, the Brooklyn accent. So tell us a little bit about where you come from, where did you grow up, and how did you become such a force in the branding and marketing world?
Yeah, man. Well, those are 3 very different questions, because usually when people ask me where I'm from, they're usually asking where's the accent from, and that's a whole different question from where I'm actually from. So, I actually was born in Europe, in a country that no longer exists, and I'll let your listeners try and guess what that might be. But I was born in a country that no longer exists, and it was a communist country that my family migrated to Australia from. And so we, when I was 2 years old, we got on a little immigrant ship called the Galileo Galilei, which I thought was kind of cool when I researched that out. And we left out of Germany and went into Italy, and then stopped in Spain and in Africa, and then landed in Australia when I was 2. And so my family are first generation immigrants, and so I was raised in Australia. So that's where the not quite New Jersey accent comes from. Though, when I talk to Australians, they ask me where I'm from, and when I talk to Americans, they ask me where I'm from. And so I'm, the accent's from nowhere in particular, which is,
Well, you know what it is?
which
'Cause
is,
I hear a lot of Australian. I hear a lot of Welsh, and that's why I was like, wait a minute, I can see both. I can see, a little bit of everything. And you're kind of you're like a road dog. You're from everywhere, but from
yeah.
nowhere. You know
I,
what I mean?
I am an international man. I'm international man.
You're the
Yeah, it
international
is.
man
It's
of mystery, right?
international man of mystery. Yeah, because it is. It's a combination. I've lived all over the United States, so it's a combination of all of that. I've lived in California and in the Midwest, and now I'm in the Deep South, and so it's a bit of that. And then also I'm European descent, and so the European Australian accent is very different to the regular Australian accent. And so, it's just, it's from it's from nowhere in particular, but it's from wherever I am. People ask me where I'm from, so that's pretty much where I'm at right now.
So okay, so let's hop back in the Wayback Machine. So what kind of little kid was Paul? Was he somebody that was great at sports, liked to read a lot? Tell us about you growing up.
So yeah, growing up, I was the kid that was always doodling on whatever pieces of paper. If I had a piece of paper, if I didn't have a piece of paper, I'd scratch it into the desk. But I was always doodling, always drawing, always being creative. I now realize that I had ADHD, but I didn't have it then. Then I was just rambunctious and didn't pay attention and couldn't focus and all of that. And so, yeah, I was always a creative kid, always liked to draw, but I was never like really great at drawing. I love to draw. I love to, doodle. I would copy Donald Ducks and Mickey Mouses and different cartoon characters. But I was never like really fantastic at drawing. And so for me, I didn't know what that would lead to. Like, I didn't know how I would make a life out of drawing and being creative. And I was always a creative thinker. I always, thought of things, differently and said, hey, what about if we did this? And what about if we did that? And I was always very creative that way, but never really saw what that would lead to in a career. And so for me, it wasn't until high school when we had a teacher suggested, hey, why don't you do like work experience? I went to an all boys high school. It was a trade school, and it was kind of I could say it's kind of like a mini prison. It was kind of like Lord of the Flies prison. It was an all boys high school. I mean, we wore khakis and polos. We wore desert boots. We learned trades. We learned woodworking and steelwork and sheet metal and all of the stuff that I was terrible at. Like I could not do any of that. I still can't do any of that. I'm terrible at fixing anything. If I try and fix it, I buy the tools and then I make it worse usually. So I went to this trade school. The art teachers, of course, it had an art class, and they loved me because I was creative and I was artistic, and not many other boys were. And so there was a time when we had to go and work in an area that we might be interested in. And so if you were interested in woodworking, you'd go do woodworking or whatever. And the teacher said, well, what about like graphic design? Do you want to do something like that? And I was like, I don't even know what that is. What is graphic design? What does that mean? And so I went and worked at an agency in Melbourne, Australia. And I still know where that agency is. I still know the building that it's at. And I was able to see that a thing called graphic design or commercial art existed. And I realized that even though I couldn't draw, I wasn't very great at drawing things, that I could still be creative, because what I would do is find other people that could draw and other people that would do photography and other people that would do other things, and I would bring it together creatively. And for me, that was a huge moment for my life. I was like, oh my goodness, I think I figured out what I want to do with my life. Because before that, I was like, I doodle, I draw pictures. What am I going to do with that? How am I going to make a living doing those things. And so it was when I went to that work experience at the agency was when I first realized that graphic design or commercial art or communications art, as it was called then, was a thing, and that I could do it. And so that's kind of what I pursued in college. And my first job out of college was doing that, and I've been doing that for 30 years now.
See, now when I think high school, boys high school, I'm picturing you with shorts, a Gibson SG, playing guitar like Angus Young. Is from Australia, so that's where my warped mentality goes.
No, that was only the fancy rich white kids did that. That was on the other side of the tracks. I was on the immigrant side, the west side I was kind of in the New Jersey of Melbourne. I was on the other side of where the other kids were. We were the immigrants. We were the the nickname was Wogs. We were not the white folk. And so even though I'm white, but we were just the immigrants. And so we're on the west side of the tracks. And so there was a little different. It was khaki work pants and polo shirts, and it was workwear. That was our uniform. We wore uniforms. We all wore the same uniform, but it was more workwear than it was AC/DC. Now we had AC/DC everywhere. I mean, that was that was definitely a thing, and it was pretty unique experience going to an all boys high school. I mean, we would beat each other up for recess. That would be our activity. We learned how to fight. We learned how to, it was very different. It wasn't regular high school.
Yeah, you remind me more of an AC/DC guy than Men at Work kind of guy. So I think it's more. So
yeah.
What was it like getting out of school and then joining the workforce? How did you get along getting into the workforce, doing what you love? And did you ever always have an entrepreneurial spirit, or did you just go along to get along?
The entrepreneurial spirit actually comes from my mom. My mom was very entrepreneurial. She, being an immigrant, not being able to speak English, she hustled, she worked, she had multiple jobs. While doing multiple jobs and full-time jobs, she would also sell Tupperware, and she would sell Avon, and she would, she was always trying to find something to sell to support her family. My dad was the same way. And she taught me about, hustle. She taught me about finding opportunities and making them work. And so I kind of had a little bit in me from her. And so, for me, my first job, out of college was at a publishing company. And so, I stayed there for about 9 years, and then I left that to kind of launch out into my own business. I realized that I enjoyed helping people on a more personal basis, whereas working in a big company, you work with people and you do capital campaigns and raise a lot of money and all of that stuff. But I realized that I also enjoyed working directly with people. And so, I left that job after 9 years and kind of launched that on my own and started my own agency in my basement. And ever since then, I've always gone back to entrepreneurship and doing my own thing and doing my own agency.
But since you started, I mean, even just since we become friends, the game has changed. It changes day by day. I mean, even with Meta, I can't search anything where it's saying you want to use AI. I can't do anything
right.
without, so it's changing on a daily basis. And even with DALL-E and Chat GPT-4, a lot of it is becoming AI generated. But now, once you get into the game a little bit, you start realizing, well, that's AI generated. That's AI generated. So I think if you have AI plus humanity put together, you can't fail. But if you're just we're going to rely on AI, I don't think you're going to be around for very long. What do you think?
Yeah, I think every new technology makes what used to be personal impersonal. With television, and movies took away theater, and printing, took away orators and speeches and learning by somebody speaking. And so I think every new technology has the possibility of taking away the personal, but I think there's always, people like people. Like, it's why advertising with people usually resonates better than things, and so, I think people are always going to lean into and want the real things, the real connections, the stuff that feels human. But they're going to also enjoy AI. But I think there's going to be a place where, they're going to miss the reality. They're going to miss the personal. They're going to miss the connection. And I don't think we need to fear AI yet. Maybe we need to fear it in a little bit, because it's not just cool for creating, resumes and text and copy and cool images. I mean, there's a side of it that's pretty scary. It's kind of a pretty snake. We like to play with it, but it's going to bite us at some point. But I think AI and I think the change that is happening is just part of how we are as humans. We're constantly finding new technology to make our lives easier. And sometimes it's small leaps forwards, and other times it's just these humongous leaps forward. And I think AI is part of that. Like, it's only been about a year or so since it kind of came to the forefront and became accessible to anybody. And even within that short time frame, it's changed. Went from making weird fingers, and on images, to where you look at an image now and it's like, wait, is that AI? Is that a photograph? Is that real? Is it not real? So I think there's going to be a place for it. I think the people that use AI are going to be people that are going to succeed. But I don't think that the analog experiences that we love as humans are ever going to go away and lose their attraction.
And like you said, you like, I watched a video from Gary Busey, and I swore it was Gary Busey. But when I had to really, really look and watch his mouth move, I was like, come on, man. I'm like, that is so wrong. But
yeah.
like, for me, I use AI every day, and I tell people I'm honest, but I use it as an assistant. Like, I go to my doctor, he's got a PA. I go to my lawyer, he's got an assistant. So my AI is my assistant, but I don't use it as a crutch. I use it as an assistant. So is that something you agree with?
Yeah, I think it can definitely assist us. I think it can become a crutch. I think we can stop thinking analytically and actually reading through what GPT gives us. I think people can get lazy with it if they use it as a crutch. I think that if they use it as a tool, it can be a powerful tool, and it can augment what you're doing. I mean, it can help you with your writing, it can help you with your creativity, it can help you with the things that need to be produced. But it definitely shouldn't be a crutch, because I think it can also be wrong. I mean, I've used it in some cases for writing some stuff, and when I've read it, it was actually incorrect. And so I think if you lean on it without being analytical or critical of it, I think it can become dangerous.
And that's something I agree with. Like, I had somebody on the show, and I'm not going to mention his name. He wrote an article, and I know he didn't write it. Especially the first words were unlocked and delved, and I know he doesn't speak that kind of language. So I asked him about it, what he wrote, and to get context, and he couldn't give me an answer. So he didn't even realize what he wrote. So I think, like, anybody can put something into Chat GPT, but if you go on a podcast or you get on a stage and somebody asks you a question and you're just using made up stuff, you're not really learning anything. So
Right.
I think a lot of people, they use it as a crutch until they get called down on it. Then they're like, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I think we absolutely have to be careful that we don't make it a crutch, that we don't get lazy with it. I think it's a great tool that can augment what we're doing, but I think it can be a dangerous tool if we trust it 100%, and we also stop being creative and stop being critical about what's being produced. And so I think, creating the content just to generate content and just to get stuff out there, people are going to see through that at some point. And so I think that's dangerous for you to do that kind of stuff.
I was watching an interview with my friend Gary V, and he was talking about that just in the last 3 months, Google has lost 30% of their searches because it's a lot of it's going to be is being searched through Chat GPT, Barrett, and all that stuff. And he asked everybody to hold their hand up who has used Chat GPT in the last 90 days, and almost 90% of the hands went up. And for me,
Yeah, yeah,
if I want to know something, I don't even go to Google anymore. Now I just write, tell me about this in Chat GPT, and I'll learn from it. But I also know that
yeah.
I don't have to go through the first 10 ads being sponsored yet.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
that's
think.
coming. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think Google is certainly rethinking some things. I think there are several things that they need to rethink. First of all, and they've done this in my conversation with Dennis Yu. Google just went through some radical change of how they're doing stuff, and a lot of people, their strategies and the things that they've been doing to rank on Google are now dead. Like they're over, they're broken, and they're actually going to be pushed down the search results because they've tried to game the system. And so Google's having to deal with the people that are gaming the system. For instance, if I wanted to find, the best 10 microphones for podcasting, there are people that have gamed the system, and those results will show up first because they're affiliate links. They're really not reviews. They're really not tested. They're worthless pages that people have simply created with affiliate links because they wouldn't just make money. And so Google's having to deal with that, because what's happening is just like you talked about, and my kids are doing this, and I started doing this as well, is instead of going to Google to ask a question, if I'm trying to do a search, I'm actually going into an AI, whether it's GPT or Claude or Meta AI or whatever, and asking it to give me the results. Hey, give me the best 10 microphones based on sales and user reviews and all of that, and then it feeds me the results. And so I think that is definitely a thing that Google should be nervous about, and I doubt they are not aware of it, because they're going to have to deal with it. And so Google's going to have to rethink what they are doing when it comes to search, how they are doing it, how people are using them, how they can clean up the people that are gaming the system, that have figured out how to manipulate the algorithms and the SEO and all of that stuff, and figure out how to get back on top, because they want your attention. I mean, that's what they're all about is, if they have your attention, they can sell ads and make more money. And if they can't get your attention, if somebody else is getting that, then that's a big loss for them. And so I think they're going to have to figure out what's the next phase of Google, and how does Google deal with AI, which, like you said, is everywhere now. And people, everywhere they go, they've got an AI something popping up asking them to use AI. And so I'm sure they're scrambling right now, and probably they'll release something soon to deal with that issue of how do I give people knowledge, and they might even have to split it into, if you're looking for knowledge, here's the path to take, and if you're looking for things, here's the path to take. And maybe they'll converge them, maybe they'll separate them, but they're definitely going to have to do something about AI and when it comes to search.
So, okay. So, because as I see, I'm writing stuff down as we go through because I don't want to miss anything. But, whatever you input is what's going to output. Like for me, if I put it, like for my podcast and I write something into ChatGPT, it's going to be about a paragraph long. It's just not going to be like, go find this for me. And the reason why, because I don't remember who it was. He said, if you give me a paintbrush and you give Michelangelo a paintbrush, you're going to get two totally different things, because we know how to work with it. You can give me a hammer and I can just break shit. I can't build nothing. But if you give somebody a finishing hammer and he's a finishing carpenter, he can make something beautiful. So talk about how your inputs will determine your outputs.
Yeah, I think when it comes, are you talking about AI specifically? Yeah. I think prompting is definitely a field that a lot of people are utilizing, creating the right prompts to create the right inputs to get the right outputs. And I think AI companies are also going to look how to make that easier, how, to give you quality results, because they want your attention and they want you to use their product. And so I think they're going to have to figure out how to make it, the onboarding and the using of it, a lot easier than it is. Whether it's click these things, what are you looking for? You click these 3 things, and then it gives you another set of things to choose. Click these 3 things, and it gives you another set of things to choose. That creates the perfect prompt to get you to where you want to go. But prompting definitely makes a big difference. I mean, you can write a short prompt and you can get a pretty decent answer. I mean, prompting is not super difficult, but man, if you get really good at prompting, and if you have a collection of resources that you've gathered and put into some sort of a document that you just pull from, that's definitely valuable. And on my podcast, I interview Jeff Hunter, and he's got some great tips on how to do that as well. And he has documents that he's just collected a lot of data in, and then he just uploads that document into an AI anytime he needs a certain type of result, and the AI uses that document as a source for generating the results that he gets. And so I think there's ways to do it, but definitely saving what works, keeping track of it, and then re-inputting it every time you need a certain type of result is definitely valuable.
So, okay, so let's talk about what you do, and then we'll get into the podcasting. But for me,
Yeah.
I realized how important branding, marketing is in podcasting, because like I've been out around my town, and I always wear my swag. And people will come up to me, "Hey, you're that vertical momentum guy," and it's like an
Wow.
85-year-old guy, and I'm like, but he's like, "I seen your hat, I seen your swag," and he said, "I seen you out before, but because you were wearing a hat, I approached you, because I think if you weren't wearing the hat, I wouldn't approach you, because it probably wasn't you." So it became part of my brand. So talk about how important branding and marketing is in business, but also in podcasting.
Well, I think it's super important in business because we live in a world that is pretty saturated with people trying to get your attention. And, for me, when it came time to do something, for instance, for the podcast that I just launched a few weeks ago, for me, I needed to give it a name. The name was important to me. And then I needed a hook. I needed something that made it interesting, that made it stand out from everybody else, and also gave it a reason for people to say, "Do you know what, that has my interest. I think I want to be a part of that." And so, that's where I came up with the word Headsmack. The word Headsmack was actually something that I had come up with, over 20 years ago, for a brainstorming framework. I found myself going into a lot of meetings, and people asked, I was a creative guy. And so they're like, "Hey, we're trying to do creative thinking. We're trying to come up with ideas." And so I came up with a Headsmack framework that would help people think creatively, even if they're not creative. And so I've had that name, a part of my world for, 20 plus years. And I used it in workshops. I've spoken from stage on it and things like that, but I never really did a whole lot with it. So when it came time to name the podcast, that name just kept coming back to me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to call it Headsmack, but what does that mean for a podcast? How do I make that interesting? And so it wasn't until, I had a drive home from St. Louis with my wife. We were just driving quietly in the car, and the phrase "conversations with misfits" came up, and I thought, you know what, that's what it is. That's what I want to do. I want to have conversations with people that have unique stories, that have sometimes felt like misfits. They're mavericks, they're trailblazers, they're the ones that stand out and do things differently. And then I want to talk to them about those aha moments, because that's where Headsmack comes from. It's like oh my goodness, that's, I didn't think of that. It's a head smack. It's an aha moment. And I felt that those folks that I had those conversations with have probably had those head smack moments, or can share those kind of moments with listeners, those moments that can give the listener a head smack and say, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that in my business. I hadn't thought about that in my life. I hadn't thought about that in my marriage or my relationships or my faith," or whatever it might be. And so for me, those two things helped create the brand. And because I wrestled with those two things, I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to get the type of people on the podcast that I have gotten is because there's a big idea behind it. There's something that is different, that stands out, that has something interesting about it. And so I feel that, to me, that branding part of it was a big strength of it. The other part of it was the graphics behind it, the visuals. It looked like I wasn't going into it kind of just haphazardly. I wasn't just kind of throwing this together, that there was passion and there was intent and there was ideas and creativity and branding behind it. It wasn't just something that, hey, I just came up with an idea and let me just slap something together, because, certain people wouldn't be attracted to that. And my goal was to attract valuable guests that would help the people that would be listening. And so I think for branding the podcast, I think some of those things also play out even in branding a business. Is, if you want to stand out, if you want to not look like everybody else, if you want people to pay attention to you, you need to do something to do that. And a lot of times that's branding, and branding is, I have a distinction between a brand and branding. A brand is basically what people think and feel about what you say and do. It's not just what you say and do. Like, you can say and do a lot of things. You can say, hey, you can trust us as a brand. You can say that all day. But your brand is what you say and actually do. It's not only saying, trust, integrity, passion, under your logo, and that's our branding and that's our brand. And it's like, yeah, but you don't have integrity because you've cheated me, and I can't trust you because of that. And, you're not really passionate. I call you up on the phone and you act like you don't even want to be there, And so I think, so your brand is what people think and feel about what you say and do. And so what you say and do are pretty important, but also what they think and feel about it, the reputation that you've created, also formulates what your brand is. And so that's what your brand is. Now, branding is everything you say and do. A lot of people try and define what branding is. Branding is, in 2024, branding is everything you say and do, because we live in a culture that what you say and do is everywhere. They see you, they hear you, especially if you have any kind of an online presence. And anytime your truck is driving, if your logo is on your truck, if your logo is on your building, if your logo is on anything, that's part of branding. How your people answer the phone, that's part of branding. Like, people are going to create a thinking and a feeling about what you say and do, and that's going to formulate what your brand is in their mind. And so how you answer the phone, how you respond to emails, how you respond to comments on social media, all of that stuff has to do with your branding. And so we can no longer, it used to be people would say, branding is my logo, branding is my, tagline, branding is my website. No, it's everything you say and do. Everything you say and do makes people think and feel something, and that formulates what your brand is.
And I totally agree. Like I said, you had Dennis on your show, you had Tony on your show. If you would have asked them about me, if they would have been like, "Oh, that guy's a shitbag," you're probably going to be like, "Yeah, we recorded an episode. I'm probably not going to put that out." But for me, like, my biggest, somebody asked me, because this year I'm going to be on 300 podcasts, and I'm going to release 300 this year. But somebody asked me, well, what's your biggest flex? And I'm like, Google me. Simple. Yeah. Just Google me. Yeah. Because it does. I could say I'm the greatest of all time, which I never do. But if Dean Graziosi shouts me out, if John Lee Dumas writes the whole back cover of my book, then that sinks. It's what other people say about me. Because I got a T-shirt that says, what does it say? Heroes talk about themselves, but legends get talked about. So
nice.
We can shout it. We can shout at the top. We're great. Yeah. But it's Mary down the street. What is she saying? And talking about us. So talk about that. Is a lot of people don't realize how important social proof is, especially now in today's social media.
Well, that's the thing, is anytime somebody hears your name, anytime somebody somehow gets your name and you get their attention, that is the first thing they're going to do. They're going to check out, do they have a website? What does the website say about them? Do they have a Facebook? What does that say about them? And then they're going to read reviews. They're going to see, what does your Google business profile say? If you're an author and you say you have a best-selling book, well, let's see what Amazon says. How good of a book is it, and what kind of reviews do you have? What are people saying about your book? And so, we do live in a culture, and it stems from way back in the day before there was any internet or anything. You'd ask your neighbor, hey, I have a plumbing issue. I need new, horseshoes on my horse. Who do you recommend? Have you worked with a local blacksmith? How was he? No, man, don't go to him. Go to the guy next town over. He's going to be way better. And so social proof has been around forever. Who do you recommend for this? What do you think of them? Is there other people that will, corroborate what they say about themselves? Is it really true? And I think when it comes to, creating your brand and putting out your branding and putting out your social content and putting out all of that stuff, is getting those testimonials, I think, is pretty critical. Getting video testimonies is awesome. Getting people to post stuff on your Google business profile, on your Facebook page profile, leaving comments, all of that stuff plays into your brand being built up and that social proof being built up. And for when people check you out, they've got something to find about you. And so very critical in today's culture, because people are going to want to check you out. And a lot of websites are just that. They're for when people does a background check on you, there's something that they can look at and see if you are who you say you are, you do what you say you do, you solve the problems that I need solved, and have others experience that from the things that you're promising.
But, and I keep going back to Dennis because I love Dennis. But
great guy. I enjoyed my conversation with him.
My wife wasn't too happy with him because he's been on my show 3 times now. And he actually sent me a pair of socks with my picture on it. So every time we go out, I wear those socks. And she's like,
nice.
But because every time I open up my sock drawer, I think of Dennis. So he does stuff different, just like Steve Sims when I had him on the show. He says if everybody else is going left, I go right. It's kind of like for you, when we hang up today, I'm going to ask you for your address. I'm going to send you something from me, handwritten thank you notes, just to say I appreciate you, because who gets handwritten thank you notes in the mail? Nobody.
Right.
So talk about going left. Well, now everybody's going right, and especially in the corporate world, and trying to go with AI instead of going more human.
Well, I think, and others have said it in a similar way, zig when others are zagging as well. And I think that's the whole thing of differentiation. And I think I mentioned that earlier is, look at ways when it comes to what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're saying it, how you look, how you present yourself. I mean, even when I work with brands and creating logos and brand identity, is looking at, and I posted about this earlier on social media, about looking at the brandscape is what I call it. Look at the brandscape.
I like that. Hold on, let me write that down. I'm going to write that down. Brandscape. I like that.
And I'll go ahead and write it down. I'll keep talking.
Go ahead.
And so your brandscape is look at who your competition is and who your aspirational brands are as well. Don't just look at competition. Like, where do you want to be? Like, who's doing what you want to do? Who's 1 step ahead of you? Who's 5 steps ahead of you? Who's 10 steps ahead of you? And collect all of that. Collect as much visuals as you can, and then put your branding right in the middle of it. And do you stand out? Do you look just like them? Or do you actually look amateur compared to them? I'm surprised how many people, and I've helped a lot of these brands that when they do this, they realize, oh my goodness, I look amateur. Like, I look like I just started my business and I've been around for 10 years, because they look professional, they look put together. And so look at the brandscape and see where people are at, and then look at the opportunities for you to be different, but still make sense. Like, you don't want to be so crazy different that people are like, I don't even know what this person does. I don't know what they're about. And they look crazy, in this space. I mean, you don't want to go too crazy, but look at those opportunities where you can zig, where they're zagging, where you can, go left when they're going right. And sometimes it's as simple as colors. Is there a color palette that others are using that you could be, well, I'm going to go totally different to that. I adopted orange as my brand color decades ago, and I've stuck with that for the longest time. And now whenever anybody sees orange, they immediately associate it with me. Now, if they see orange on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok or wherever I'm at, if they like my content, they'll stop because they recognize orange is my color. Now, if they don't like my content, they keep scrolling, right? But looking at those opportunities where you can go different. And so, Coca-Cola is primarily red. Like when you think of Coke, you think of red. Well, their primary competitor is Pepsi, right? And Pepsi's primary color is blue, right? Yeah. And for the longest time, it was Target and Walmart and Kmart. They were kind of very similar brands. Well, Kmart kind of looked like Walmart color-wise, and they're kind of defunct and gone in a lot of areas. And Target, they said, well, let's go with, Walmart is blue, well, Target is red. And then Target also said, but let's also elevate out the design of what we do. Let's take it up to the next level. And so looking at things like that to zig where others are zagging is, look at color palettes, look at fonts, look at messaging, look at how they're framing the problem. Are they framing it better than I am? Is my messaging totally off? Am I positioning myself off? And so looking at where you can zig and zag is pretty powerful to differentiate yourself. And when it comes to using AI, just use it selectively and use it wisely. It's not a bad thing. It's not a terrible thing. But it's something that you've got to be super careful of, because if you lose authenticity and your brand depends on it, then that's a great loss. Like people want to feel that they're dealing with somebody authentic. So use AI to augment what you're doing, but be careful. Only certain brands can get away with doing AI stuff and people not care.
Okay, so let's talk about brand consistency. Like I watch Joe Rogan because that's who I'm gunning for. But I also watch people like Patrick Bet-David. So imagine just you turn on you go to YouTube one day and there's Patrick Bet-David wearing an On It t-shirt, wearing sweats, and then there's Joe Rogan wearing a 3-piece fitted suit. You're like, I don't get it. I don't understand.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be like, for me, if I when I go show up, even on speaking gigs, and I wear a hat for a reason, not because I'm going bald, but I wear the hat in honor of Chris Kyle. I promised his wife I'd always wear a hat to honor her husband. But if I show up and I'm not wearing a hat to a speaking event, people come up to me like, "Where's the hat?"
Right.
But this is me. But if you came on next week and I'm wearing a 3-piece suit, no hat, clean shaven, you're gonna be like, what happened? Somebody died. Something happened. So talk about brand consistency.
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's personal brand, and then there's just like business brand. And I think both of them can actually be made stronger by consistency. And so, when it comes to personal brand, I think there's value in creating a look about yourself that when people see it, it's something that not everybody builds a personal brand. Some people don't care. They can wear anything they want. But if you're trying to build a personal brand, if somebody tried to dress like you for Halloween, what would they wear? And if you have no clue, and if they have no clue, then you haven't really built a personal brand as far as you look and your vibe. For me, I always wear black. I'm always wearing Doc Martens. I rarely tuck in my t-shirt, and I usually wear a shirt over the top of it. I love, my Apple Watch, and with a brighter band. I usually on this hand, I don't have it because I'm in my office and it messes with my mouse. I usually have a wristband. I rarely wear hats because I've got a big fat head, and hats just don't look good on me. They look kind of like a little beak, if I wear them. I've tried to find bigger hats and then it looks massive, but that's kind of my brand, like my personal brand. Every time you see me, I'll be dressed a certain way. And Steve Jobs does this, did this, where if you wanted to dress as Steve Jobs, he had a look that you knew how to dress like Steve Jobs. And so that would be one question you could ask yourself. If you're building a personal brand, and that personal brand is you physically and how you look and how you feel, can somebody dress like you for Halloween? And if the answer is no, then you haven't established your brand well enough to do that. And so, like you said, there's a fracture that happens. It's great for disguises. If you don't want to be recognized in public, that's when you can break your brand and nobody will recognize you. That's why, Steve Jobs had his look, and people can dress like him. So that's personal brand. When it comes to your business brand, when you are not consistent, you create a fracture. You create what I call a fractured brand. And a fractured brand makes every single thing that you do have to work on its own equity, on its own power to get attention. When you have consistency and congruency, and when everything is aligned and matches, it builds upon itself and in the equity that you've already built in the brand, and it actually exponentially helps that brand. And so for me, I do everything with the orange and the black and the white. And my photo, I use the same profile photo across all social medias. It's the same image that I took with my iPhone in my living room. My wife took, she got tired of it, but she took the photo of me in my living room. And I use the same imagery over and over again. And so it creates a consistency. So when somebody sees that icon of the orange box with a black and white photo, they know it's me. They know it's the real me, whether I have a verification mark or not. And so creating that consistency in the look and feel and your branding and the stuff that you're putting out there, it builds the momentum of your brand. It builds the strength of your brand. It puts equity in that brand. So anytime you put something fresh out, people know it's you because they've seen the consistency in the brand. As soon as you start breaking that, as soon as you're all over the place, then every single thing that you put out has to work on its own strength and power.
And that's something that I totally agree 100%. And that's one of the first things I do when I have new students, when I teach them how to become a top-ranked podcaster, is I look at all their social media, and almost every channel has a different picture. Every channel has a different name. And I'm like, all right, if you looked up Nike on all your platforms, I'm sure it's going to have a swish and it's going to say Nike somewhere. So make sure that across all channels that you have, like you said, the same orange picture, the same picture. Make sure you're consistent across all your channels, because sometimes somebody might be like, oh, I seen you here, so let me follow you here just because I follow you somewhere else.
Right. Well, and people will also say that, like when I started getting more active on social media and started using the orange and started being very consistent with my branding, is people would say, man, you're like everywhere. And I'm like, I'm actually not. I'm everywhere consistent. And that's the important thing is, when you're consistent in a few places, it feels like you're everywhere. And, there's a roofing company here locally that I branded several years ago. And, it was a brand that had been around for a while. Their logo just needed some refreshing. I refreshed the logo, gave them a very, distinct look that kind of honored their past, but gave them a look that they can own. And they just started plastering that logo everywhere on their trucks. If they had a billboard, it was on their billboard, on their shirts, on everything that they did. And their brand, like 10x, probably even more than 10x, like their brand just grew incredibly. For one thing, they did great work and all of that stuff, and they had a great core values and all of that. But also because it suddenly felt like they were everywhere. Well, what they weren't everywhere. They were just everywhere consistent. And so I think with a brand, if you could, be everywhere consistent, it makes you feel like you're omnipresent.
And I agree. But now let's talk for the last 10 minutes about specifically podcasters. Like when I teach my students and I'm telling them, listen, you want to have swag, you want to be able to, like when I'm on camera, I'm always wearing my swag. I'm always wearing. So when people say, hey, where do you get your swag? And I'm like, well, if Michael Jordan wears Air Jordan, guess what? I'm wearing my swag. Anytime I walk out the door, I got something of my swag on.
Yeah.
And a lot.
Yeah. I'm wearing my own t-shirt here.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't. And I'm like, because my first podcast was called Success, Your Why Powers Your How. Until somebody said, hey, dumbass, how are you going to put that on a hat? And I'm going, you got a point. So talk about, eventually if you run a podcast, that you're going to eventually have swag. Because
Right.
I'll wear my stuff out and people are walking behind me and they're stopping me. Like, I know that podcast, but if I'm not
Yeah.
wearing my
Yeah.
swag, they're not going to see it. And and it's a great way to make more money for your bottom line is when you do have swag, t-shirts, hats, coffee. So talk
Yeah.
about that as building a business from just a podcast out.
Yeah. I think there are a couple of things for just from the basics. The basics is, have a good name, have a memorable name. Keep it simple, because if you're going to create swag, it's incredible how many people create super complicated, detailed infographics instead of an icon. They try and say everything with the logo. The logo's got to have all this messaging and whatever behind it, and it gets all complicated, and it's actually becomes an infographic, not a logo. A logo should be simple, should be clean. If you can't afford a designer, then make it simple and clean. Don't get fancy. Don't just try and be creative if you're not creative. If you're not creative and you can't afford a designer, just keep it super simple. Bold fonts, not hyper detailed, because as soon as you get into hyper detail, you won't be able to do, like you have the Under Armour hat. You won't be able to do embroidery on a hat if your logo is super detailed. So keep it very simple, keep it clean, keep it smart. When it comes to, beyond the swag branding is, choose a color palette and stick to it. Choose one profile photo and stick to it. Use that on everything. Get it as professionally made as possible. If you can't afford a professional photographer, you can just shoot it, up against a light wall, step back from it so it doesn't look like it's a prison lineup photo. Step away from the wall. Have maybe good evening light, shooting at a 45-degree angle at you. So the light's nice and low. If it's too high, if you shoot it in the middle of the day, you're going to have super raccoon eyes. And so don't shoot in the middle of the day. Don't shoot it with harsh, lighting coming from you from all kind of weird angles. Have a nice 45-degree light shining at you. And maybe, if you're next to a white wall, it can reflect some light back. So get a good photograph, get it, from the waist up if possible, because different podcasts for show notes or show graphics, you're probably going to need more than just your head. And so, get a couple of shots, get it of your head, get it of, half your body. And then choose maybe something else interesting about your brand that could make it stand out as well, whether it's a pattern or a treatment of your photograph. Like my photographs, I do them in black and white with a little bit of white behind the key features of the person that's on there for my cover art. So look at ways to do an interesting treatment, whether that's some interesting shapes, whether some interesting textures or patterns or something to at least make it stand out. So when somebody sees it in combination with your logo, in combination with your photo, it'll immediately be like, oh, that's that person's podcast, or that's that person's brand, because I recognize it. And so I think those are some steps, some easy steps that I think people can do that don't require a professional, but certainly a professional can take it to the next level. But at least if you don't have the budget and don't have the resources to do it, then you could do it yourself pretty easily.
And as you're talking, I was thinking, okay, Nike just had 3 words: just do it.
Yeah.
Coke is it. So you don't really have to do all these crazy logos and catchphrases. Sometimes it's just do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The shorter you can keep it, the more repeatable it is. Mine is Conversations with Misfits, 3 words. And so, the more you can simplify it for it to still make sense, without getting overly fancy. I mean, you can certainly try AI to help you. But keeping it simple as possible. When people see it, they're like, yeah, I think I want to listen to that. I think I want to hear what that's about, is pretty key. So don't get overly fancy, where people can't remember it and they can't repeat it.
And that's something I agree with 100%. Is like, if somebody asks me what's my elevator pitch for my podcast, and I'm talking about, if they say, what's your podcast about? It's about resilience in life and business. That's it. So I don't have to go into a dissertation. I'm like, that's it.
Right.
And a lot of people are like, oh, I got this and this. And you're like, shh. The eyes glaze over. You're like, okay. and you're never
Yeah.
going to listen. So what is
Well, and I
going
think
on in Paul's world now? What do you got coming up? Because I wish I could remember her name, but you just had a female podcast guest on. She blew my mind, and I can't remember her name, and I wish
Katie
I could.
Richardson, Heather
Y-
Parody.
Heather Parody, yes.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
was amazing. So what do you got
yeah.
coming up now?
You want some spoilers, huh? Um, interviewed Molly Jacks, and she's amazing as well. I mean, I've got a whole list of I've got about 19 episodes that I've yet to release. Rachel Miller, amazing. Kyrie Oliver, Manny Wolf, Chris Benetti. Um,
I love me some Manny Wolf. Manny has
yeah,
been on my show 3 times now. I
yeah.
love me some
Akbar,
Manny Wolf.
yeah, Akbar Sheikh, Jeff Hunter, Joseph Aaron. There's a guy, Richard Kaufman. I don't know whether you'd like that one or not, but
Bro, I know that guy. Just don't even put it out. He's horrible.
yeah. Von Glitchka. Von Glitchka is the guy that actually designed my what I call the Voppa tattoo. I don't even have it right now with me, but you probably see it on social media. Incredible designer and artist. Yeah, amazing people. Annalie Hansen, AJ Adams, um, Chris Maroy. He's an actor in Hollywood. Jim Meskimen. Talked to him, and he's actually the son. And you probably remember this. Remember Happy Days?
I love Happy Days.
You know Mrs. C?
Oh, Mrs. Cunningham, yeah.
Yeah, Mrs. Cunningham, her son. I interviewed him. Amazing guy. He's been on like probably every TV show and movie. Everybody's probably seen him. They just don't recognize him. He's usually he's a character actor. And so, just a lot of really great interviews. Haley Shane, she took some time that she was depressed and turned that into something that's been very profitable for her. She's a designer and a brand strategist. So yeah, a lot of great people, man. I just read you off a whole list of people that I haven't fully really. Well, I guess I did. I did a social post and I shared some of them. So all
And
of
it's
that
funny
coming up.
how me and you kind of run neck and neck with a lot of our friends and a lot of our guests. So I got a
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
I just got text message from a friend of mine, Freddie, and he wants to know what a Voppa is.
I was wondering if you'd ask that. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, and thank you, Freddie, for asking that. As I mentioned earlier, I went to an all boys high school, and at an all boys high school, we didn't call each other by our first names. It wasn't hi Richard, hi Paul, hi John, hi Bill. It was we called each other by our last name. So you would have started off as Kaufman and would have ended up as something totally different. Well, my last name was Povolni. We called each other by our last names, and mine was Povolni, and people couldn't say it. They would get tongue tied. They would call it Povolini, and they'd add letters to it and make it sound Italian. And so, with me, they started calling me Pava. For the longest time, I was Pava. And then one of those recesses, maybe after we'd finished beating each other up, we were saying our names backwards for some weird reason, and mine was in La Vop, and they were like Vop. We like the sound of Vop, and so they combined Vop with Pava, and it became Voppa. And so my nickname all through high school was Voppa. And so when it came time to name my business, it was I had to call it Voppa. And so that's kind of the origin of the name. It started off as a nickname, and there were people in high school and in Australia that never knew my real name. I'd always been Voppa, and they didn't know that I was actually Paul Povolni. So that's it. That's the origin of Voppa.
And by the way, I love you have some. I love your Instagram profile. I love your LinkedIn profile. So where can they find your podcast? And if they want to get in touch with you, how do they go about getting in touch with you?
So the podcast is Headsmack, and if you just type in Headsmack, you're sure to find it. You're going to see my big fat head. You're going to see orange. And so just type in Headsmack on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart. It's on several different channels. And so just Headsmack, and you should be able to find it pretty quickly. And then just I'm everywhere as Voppa. As you said, Google me. But just Voppa.com is my branding and brand strategy website. And on there, I have if somebody wants to connect, they can reach out. There I have a contact form, or just connect with me on social media. Pretty much everywhere I'm Voppa.
Are you accepting new clients?
Yeah. If anybody needs help with, actually, one of the things that I'm really considering and leaning into is helping people launch podcasts through effective branding and brand strategy. And so that's an offer that's kind of down the road. I haven't quite formulated what that would be, but if anybody needs help with branding, brand strategy, visual strategy, I'm certainly willing to talk.
I love it. And by the way, if your podcast numbers have gone up, I take personal responsibility because I'm listening to every podcast. When I'm cleaning my house in the morning, I'm actually got your podcast going in the background. So if your numbers have gone up, you can thank me.
Well, thank you. Do you have your favorite so far?
Each one, like even though I know you had Dennis, you'll have Manny. Even though I've had him on the show, I know I'm going to get something different out of every episode because you are like me. You just don't ask the average question. You go a little bit deeper. So for me, every episode has been one of those. Shit. Let me write down Brandscape. Wow. let me incorporate that into my palette. So I can't. It's kind of like naming your favorite child. It's like you can't.
Yeah. So you're having some Headsmack moments yourself, right?
Exactly.
Brother, that's the whole goal.
Yeah. And I just want to say, brother, I'm so grateful for your friendship. And
well, thank you, man.
Thank you for being into my circle and my inner circle. And I just want to let you know that I love and appreciate you. And I'm grateful for you.
Love and appreciate you too, man. Appreciate you having me on. I feel honored to be here, and thankful for our friendship as well.
I love it. So guys, make sure you check out his LinkedIn page, all of his Instagram. His Instagram is fire, by the way. So guys, make sure you check that out. And guys, if you love coffee, let me know. I'll get you the information. And if you get it delivered to your house, you get 10% off. So just write coffee down below if you're interested. And guys, remember, vertical momentum. The only way to go is. I love you. Awesome, Paul. Man. Have an amazing week. Keep head smacking people. We need a lot of head smacking in this country and in this world today.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. And thanks again for having me on.
All right, brother. Be good.
Take care, man. Bye-bye.